This presentation explores a legend containing unsettling themes and descriptions of a monstrous entity. Viewer discretion is advised. What if the devil was born, not in hell, but in a quiet cottage in the woods of New Jersey? What if he wasn't a fallen angel, but the 13th child of a tired, desperate mother? In 1735, in the heart of the sprawling, eerie wilderness known as the Pine Barrens, a woman named Deborah Leeds was about to give birth for the 13th time. Overwhelmed, impoverished, and at the end of her rope, she raised her hands to the heavens during a violent thunderstorm and screamed a curse. She declared that if she had to have another child, she would rather the devil take it. 9 months later, on a dark and stormy night, her wish was granted. The birth was, by all accounts, normal at first. A healthy baby boy. But within moments, the nightmare began. The infant started to change, to twist and contort. Its body elongated. Its skin turned leathery and dark. A horse-like head grew from its neck, with glowing red eyes that burned with an ancient malice. Great bat-like wings ripped through its back, and its legs thinned into spindly limbs ending in cloven hooves. Its hands morphed into vicious claws. A forked tail whipped back and forth, smashing furniture. The tiny cottage was filled with a sound no one had ever heard before. A high-pitched, blood-curdling scream that pierced through the roar of the storm. The creature, the Leeds devil, the 13th child, turned on its own family. It slaughtered the midwife before its horrified mother and siblings could react. Then, with a deafening shriek, it flew up the chimney and disappeared into the storm-racked darkness of the Pine Barrens. It has been there ever since. For nearly 300 years, this story has been the dark heart of American folklore. But it's more than just a ghost story told around a campfire. It's a living legend tied to a very real, very strange place. The New Jersey Pine Barrens. It's 1 million acres of dense, coastal pine forest sitting right in the middle of the most densely populated state in America. A vast, sandy wilderness of twisted pitch pines, dark cedar swamps, and slow-moving rivers the color of tea. It's a place that feels ancient, isolated, and untouched by the modern world that surrounds it. The ground is acidic, the soil is sandy, making it useless for farming. For centuries, it was a refuge for outcasts, deserters, and those who wanted to disappear from the world. It's a place where towns have been swallowed by the forest, where unmarked sand roads lead to nowhere, and where it's easy to get lost. A perfect place for a monster to hide. A perfect place to hunt. In the early days, the colonists called it the Leeds Devil. They were terrified. Farmers reported their livestock being mutilated, their chickens slaughtered. Children were warned not to go out after dark, lest the creature snatch them from their yards. Brave men who formed hunting parties would venture into the pines, only to come back empty-handed, their faces pale, telling stories of a creature that moved faster than a deer and screamed like a dying woman. They found tracks. Strange, cloven-hoof prints that would suddenly stop, as if the beast that made them had simply taken flight and vanished into the canopy. The fear was real. It was palpable. It spread from the isolated homesteads of the Barrens to the growing towns and cities on its borders. This wasn't just a monster. It was a curse made flesh, a constant, terrifying reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of civilization. But here's where the story gets complicated. We live in a world of science and reason. We have satellites that can read a license plate from space and cameras in every pocket. A flying, horse-headed monster with bat wings doesn't fit. The easy answer is to dismiss it. To call it a folktale, a misidentification of a crane or an owl, a story created to scare children. And for many, that's enough. But the Jersey Devil refuses to die. It refuses to become just a story. Why? Because the sightings never stopped. They've continued, generation after generation, for almost 300 years. Thousands of people, credible people, from police officers and pilots to government officials and ordinary citizens, have reported seeing something they cannot explain. They describe the same thing over and over. The horse-like head, the leathery wings, the terrifying, unearthly scream. The accounts are too numerous, too consistent, and too widespread to be dismissed as simple misidentification or a shared delusion. It has been seen in backyards, flying over highways, and stalking the dark woods of the Pine Barrens. This raises a chilling question. A question that sits at the very core of this mystery. Are thousands of people over the course of 3 centuries all lying? Or all mistaken in the exact same way? Or is there something truly out there in the pines? Something ancient, something predatory, something that was born in a cursed rage, and has haunted the American landscape ever since. The real mystery isn't just whether the Jersey Devil is real. The deeper question is why. Why has this specific legend endured with such power, such tenacity, when so many others have faded into obscurity? What if the creature is more than just a monster? What if it's a symbol, a warning, or something far stranger than we can possibly imagine? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all. What if the original story, the one about the cursed 13th child, isn't the whole truth? What if the real origin of the Jersey Devil is something far older and far more disturbing? The legend has always been a quiet, simmering fear in the background of New Jersey life. A local boogeyman. But that all changed in the winter of 1909. For one terrifying week in January, the creature stopped hiding. It left the isolation of the Pine Barrens and declared war on the modern world. It terrorized over 30 different towns across the entire Delaware Valley, from Philadelphia to southern Jersey. It was seen by thousands of people, sparking a wave of mass hysteria so intense that schools closed, factories shut down, and entire towns barricaded themselves in their homes after dark. The whispers of a cursed child from a forgotten century were nothing compared to the reality of what happened when the Jersey Devil decided to make its presence known to everyone, leaving behind a trail of physical evidence, terrified witnesses, and a mystery that, over 100 years later, remains completely unsolved. The year was 1909. The month January. A cold, biting wind swept across the Delaware Valley, carrying with it a sense of profound unease. It began not with a scream, but with a set of tracks. In the early morning hours of Sunday, January 17th, in the town of Bristol, Pennsylvania, a man named E.W. Minster was startled awake by strange noises outside his home. Peering out his window, he saw something that would forever be seared into his memory. It was a creature, large and winged, hopping across the snow-covered ground. It had a long neck, and its eyes, he would later report, glowed with a faint, eerie luminescence. When dawn broke, Minster and his neighbors discovered the proof. A trail of bizarre, cloven hoofprints, as if from a two-legged horse, marked a path through the snow. But these were no ordinary tracks. They started in the middle of a field, went straight over a 9-foot-tall fence without disturbing the snow on top, and crossed directly over the rooftops of several houses before disappearing as abruptly as they had begun. The local police were baffled. No known animal could leave such a trail. This was only the beginning. The next day, Monday, the phenomenon exploded. The same unidentifiable tracks were discovered miles away in Burlington, New Jersey. They crisscrossed the city, appearing in backyards, on rooftops, and even in the walled-off courtyard of the Burlington County Historical Society. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface. People whispered about a visitor in the night, something that could walk through solid walls and leap over buildings. Experienced hunters brought in their best tracking dogs, but the hounds would follow the trail for a few feet, then stop dead, whining and whimpering, refusing to go any further. Whatever left these tracks, it terrified them. By Tuesday, the 19th, the creature was no longer content to just leave its footprints. It wanted to be seen. In Gloucester City, 2 men watched in stunned silence as a creature matching the descriptions flew across the Delaware River. Later that night, in the city of Camden, a group of men were playing cards in a social club when a terrifying shriek echoed from outside. They rushed to the window and saw it, perched on a nearby roof. It was a nightmare made real. A creature with the head of a horse, the wings of a bat, and the cloven hooves of a goat. They watched, frozen, as it launched itself into the night sky. The story hit the newspapers, and what was once a local curiosity became a regional terror. The Philadelphia Evening Bulletin, the Trenton Times, they all ran front-page headlines about the mysterious beast terrorizing the tri-state area. They called it the Jersey Devil. Wednesday, January 20th, would become the most intense day of the entire ordeal. The creature seemed to be everywhere at once. In Haddonfield, a posse of armed citizens cornered the beast near a creek bed. They opened fire, riddling it with bullets. But the creature simply shook itself off, let out a piercing scream, and flew away, completely unharmed. The men were left staring in disbelief, their courage shattered. How do you fight something that cannot be killed? That same evening, the creature grew even bolder. A trolley car packed with passengers was rattling down the tracks between Haddon Heights and Clementon. Suddenly, the conductor slammed on the brakes. There, standing in the middle of the tracks, was the Jersey Devil. It stared at the trolley, its eyes glowing in the dark. Then it attacked. It slammed itself against the side of the car, shrieking and clawing at the metal. Passengers screamed and dove for cover. The conductor, a man named John Smith, and his motorman grabbed whatever they could find to fend it off. For several terrifying minutes, the beast assaulted the trolley before finally giving up and vanishing back into the darkness of the Pine Barrens. The passengers were left shaken, but with an unforgettable story to tell. They hadn't just seen tracks. They hadn't just heard a noise. They had been attacked by the monster itself. By Thursday, the 21st, the entire region was in a state of mass hysteria. The fear was a tangible thing, a suffocating blanket over every town. Businesses shuttered their windows. Mills and factories closed down because workers were too afraid to travel to their jobs in the dark. Schools across Camden and Burlington counties closed their doors, parents refusing to let their children walk outside. People nailed horseshoes over their doors for protection and loaded their shotguns, sitting vigil through the night. The panic was so widespread that the Philadelphia Zoo director posted a $10,000 reward for the creature's capture, dead or alive, hoping to quell the public's fears. He publicly stated that it was likely just a sandhill crane, but his explanation did little to calm a populace that had seen something far more terrifying. This was the day the most credible witness of all came forward. Camden police officer James Sackville was responding to a call when he came face to face with the devil. He found it in a backyard, and under the dim gaslight of the street, he got the best look anyone had yet. He later gave a detailed report, describing a creature with a head like a collie dog and a face like a horse. It had a long, thin neck, stood about 3.5 feet high on its hind legs, and had thin, powerful wings folded on its back. Before he could even draw his weapon, it let out a hissing, dreadful scream, spread its wings, and flew away. The same night, in a nearby neighborhood, a woman named Mary Sorbinski heard a commotion in her yard. She ran outside to see the Jersey Devil viciously attacking her dog. With a scream, she grabbed a broom and charged the creature, beating it until it finally released the dog and flew off into the night. Her pet, a beloved collie, lay dead on the ground. The monster was no longer just a frightening specter. It was a killer. Then on Friday, January 22nd, after a week of relentless terror that had paralyzed over 30 towns, it all just stopped. The creature was seen one last time in the early morning hours, flying over the city of Camden, and then it was gone. The sightings ended. The tracks vanished. The nightly screams fell silent. An eerie quiet descended upon the Delaware Valley, leaving behind a population traumatized and 1,000 unanswered questions. The week of terror was over. The physical evidence was undeniable. The tracks, the dead livestock, the terrified witnesses from all walks of life, including police officers and public officials. But the creature itself had vanished as if into thin air. It left behind a legend, cemented not in folklore passed down through generations, but in the cold, hard ink of newspaper headlines and official police reports. The world now knew about the Jersey Devil, and as the initial panic subsided, a new frenzy began. The desperate hunt for an explanation. Investigators, scientists, and hoaxbusters descended upon the Pine Barrens, each determined to solve the mystery. They were about to discover that the truth, or what passed for it, was far stranger and more complicated than any simple monster in the woods. The first wave of investigators to brave the tangled woods and acidic streams of the Pine Barrens weren't looking for a monster. They were looking for an explanation. To the pragmatic minds of the late 19th century, a flying beast with a horse's head and bat wings wasn't a zoological reality. It was a symptom of something else. Problem to be solved. Journalists from Philadelphia and New York, smelling a sensational story, arrived with notepads and a healthy dose of condescension. They interviewed the so-called Pineys, the isolated, often impoverished residents of the Barrens, treating their stories as quaint, if backward, local color. These early debunkers came armed with a catalog of rational possibilities. The most popular theory, one that still persists today, was the sandhill crane. It's a large bird, to be sure, with an impressive wingspan and a loud, rattling cry that could, in the dead of night, be mistaken for something otherworldly. But a horse's head? Leathery wings? The details never quite fit. Others suggested a large owl, perhaps a great horned owl, whose deep hoots and silent flight could startle an unsuspecting traveler. But again, the descriptions were too specific, too consistent, and too bizarre to be explained away by a simple bird. Then came the hoaxbusters, Men who believed that behind every monster was a con artist. They saw the Jersey Devil not as a myth, but as a deliberate deception. Perhaps, they argued, it was a scheme cooked up by smugglers during the Revolutionary War, a terrifying story designed to keep people away from their hidden trails and illegal operations. Or maybe, in more recent times, it was a prank. A local tinkerer who had fashioned a costume out of leather and bones, or a clever group of boys using lanterns and kites to create a terrifying specter in the night sky. The problem with the hoax theory was its sheer longevity. A single prank couldn't explain sightings that spanned over a century and a half. It would require a conspiracy of hoaxers, a secret society of pranksters, passed down from generation to generation, all dedicated to scaring the residents of South Jersey. The explanation quickly became more complicated than the monster itself. And for every skeptic, there was a believer with a story that defied easy dismissal. These weren't just tales from superstitious, uneducated woodsmen. Sightings were reported by postmen on their routes, by police officers on patrol, by sober, respected members of the community. They described the same impossible creature, often in meticulous detail. They spoke of its blood-curdling scream, a sound that wasn't a bird's call or a man's shout, but something utterly alien. They described its unnatural speed, its ability to move through the dense forest without making a sound, and then explode into the sky. They found tracks in the mud and snow, cloven hoof prints where no deer or goat could have gone, sometimes paired, as if the creature walked on two legs. These witnesses weren't seeking fame. Many were reluctant to even speak of what they saw, fearing ridicule from their more enlightened neighbors in the cities. They had nothing to gain, and yet their stories persisted, weaving a tapestry of fear that covered the 7 counties of the Pine Barrens. The scientists of the era, for their part, largely ignored the phenomenon. In an age of steam, steel, and electric light, the idea of a local monster was an embarrassing relic of a bygone era. They didn't venture into the pines. They didn't interview witnesses. They simply dismissed the whole affair from their comfortable university offices as a classic case of mass hysteria or folklore mutation. The Jersey Devil, they concluded, was a bogeyman, a story told to frighten children, that had simply gotten out of hand. But this dismissal only deepened the divide. To the people of the Pine Barrens, the devil was real. It was a part of their landscape, as real as the cedar water and the sugar sand. The refusal of the outside world to believe them wasn't proof they were wrong. It was proof that the outsiders just didn't understand. The creature became a symbol of their own isolation, a fierce, untamable secret that the modern world couldn't touch. For decades, this was the status quo, a stalemate between local belief and outside skepticism. The devil would appear in a flurry of sightings, terrorizing a small town for a few weeks, leaving behind strange tracks and terrified witnesses. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it would vanish back into the million-acre wilderness, and an uneasy quiet would return. The legend simmered, a low-grade fever that never quite broke. It was a ghost story, a local legend, a fascinating piece of American folklore. But it was contained within the dark woods and quiet towns of South Jersey. Then came January 1909. The world was a different place. The 20th century had arrived, and with it, a sense of boundless optimism and technological certainty. America was building skyscrapers, laying down thousands of miles of railroad track, and connecting its cities with the telegraph and the telephone. The first automobiles were beginning to rattle down city streets. Science and industry were the new gods, and they promised a future free from the shadows of the past. Superstition was supposed to be dead, buried under a mountain of progress. It was in this world, this new modern rational America, that the Jersey Devil decided to make its grand debut. It wasn't going to be a fleeting shadow on a lonely road or a strange cry in the woods anymore. For one terrifying week, the creature would step out of the realm of folklore and into the headlines of newspapers across the entire Delaware Valley and beyond. It would leave the isolation of the Pine Barrens and launch a full-scale invasion of the civilized world. The fuse was lit on a cold Sunday night, January 16th, not in the Pine Barrens, but across the Delaware River in the bustling industrial town of Bristol, Pennsylvania. A man named E.W. Minster, the town's postmaster, was at home when he heard an unnatural, terrifying sound from the direction of the river. He described it as a combination of a horse's neigh and a horrible screech. He ran to his window and saw it. Perched on the banks of the canal was a creature unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was, in his words, like a large crane, but with a long neck, bat-like wings, and a head that resembled a ram's, complete with curled horns. Its eyes, he said, glowed like balls of fire in the darkness. As he watched, frozen in disbelief, the creature let out another of its soul-shaking screams, spread its leathery wings, and launched itself into the night sky, flying off towards the town of Burlington, New Jersey. The postmaster was not a piney. He was not a superstitious woodsman. He was a respected public official in a modern American town, and he had just become the first of hundreds of witnesses in what would become the most intense, widespread, and terrifying monster flap in American history. The devil was out, and this time it was coming for everyone. The year was 1909. The world was hurtling into a new age of steel, electricity, and reason. But on the cold, dark morning of Sunday, January 17th, in the bustling town of Bristol, Pennsylvania, just across the Delaware River from the Pine Barrens, reason was about to take a holiday. E.W. Minster, the town's postmaster and a respected member of the community, was awakened in the dead of night, around 2 a.m., by a sound he couldn't place. He described it later as an eerie, almost supernatural sound. It was a horrifying screech, a wail that seemed to slice through the frigid winter air. Curious, Minster went to his window and peered out into the darkness. What he saw would be seared into his memory for the rest of his life. Moving along the banks of the Delaware Canal was a creature that defied all explanation. It was winged like a massive crane, but it hopped and glided, not flew. It had a long neck, and from its head, which he said looked like a horse's, glowed two large luminous eyes. As it let out another of its blood-curdling screams, Minster felt a chill that had nothing to do with the January air. He watched, frozen, as the unholy thing took to the sky, its huge leathery wings beating against the night. Shaken, Minster called his neighbor, a police officer named James Sackville. Sackville grabbed his service revolver and ran outside, just in time to see the creature for himself. He fired his weapon at the retreating shadow, but the bullets had no effect. The thing simply disappeared into the night, leaving behind two grown men, one a pillar of the community, the other an officer of the law, standing in the street, questioning their own sanity. When the sun rose, they found the first piece of physical evidence. In the snow along the canal were tracks unlike anything they had ever seen. They were cloven like the hoof prints of a horse or a deer, but they were split, and the stride was unnatural. One print would be deep, the next barely there, as if the creature was landing with immense force and then leaping incredible distances. The tracks led from the canal across several yards and then simply stopped, as if the thing that made them had vanished into thin air. Minster, being a man of good standing, reported his sighting to the Bristol Daily Courier. The story ran the next day, on Monday, January 18th, and that's when the floodgates opened. It turned out Minster and Sackville weren't the only ones. A local shoemaker, John McCowan, had been startled by the same scream and had seen the creature perched on a clothesline. A man named George Snyder saw it fishing in a creek, describing it as looking like a large eagle. Dozens of others came forward. They had all heard the screams, all seen a dark winged shape against the moonlit clouds. They had been too afraid, too worried about ridicule to say anything. But now, with the postmaster's testimony, their stories came pouring out. The tracks were the real catalyst. They were everywhere, all over Bristol. They went up and down streets, through backyards, and most disturbingly across rooftops. People woke up to find these bizarre, cloven hoof prints stamped into the snow on the roofs of their 2- and 3-story homes. How could any known animal do that? The prints would go straight up the side of a building, run across the peak of the roof, and then leap an impossible distance, 30, 40, 50 feet, to the next rooftop, without any marks in the snow-covered ground between them. The panic in Bristol was immediate and palpable, but it was no longer just Bristol's problem. By Tuesday, January 19th, the creature and its telltale tracks had begun to appear all over the Delaware Valley. It was as if it was on a terrifying tour. In Burlington, New Jersey, the reports were nearly identical. A prominent physician, Dr. Alexander Van Rensselaer, found the tracks in his yard. So did the fire chief. A group of men on their way to work saw the creature itself, describing it as having the head of a collie dog and the neck of a horse. They said it screeched and flew away, leaving them terrified. The police in Burlington were inundated with calls. Posses were formed. Groups of brave or perhaps foolish men armed themselves with shotguns and rifles and set out into the woods and fields, determined to hunt down this monster. They followed the tracks for miles. The trail would be clear and easy to follow, and then in the middle of an open, snow-covered field, it would just end. No trees to fly into, no caves to hide in. The tracks were just gone. It was maddening. It was impossible. The sightings grew more frequent, more detailed, and more frightening. In the town of Gloucester City, a man saw it outside his window and gave chase, describing it as being 3 feet tall with the face of a dog and the head of a horse. In Mount Holly, a posse of over 100 men tracked the creature for hours before again losing the trail inexplicably. It was seen in Moorestown, Pemberton, Medford, and a dozen other towns. It seemed to be everywhere at once, covering dozens of miles in a single night. And then its behavior began to change. It was no longer just a phantom, a fleeting shadow in the night. It was becoming bold, aggressive. In the city of Camden, a woman named Mary Serbinsky heard a commotion in her backyard. She ran outside to find the creature viciously attacking her dog, tearing at it with its claws. She screamed and beat the thing with a broomstick until it finally let go, hissed at her, and flew off over the fence, leaving her poor dog bleeding in the snow. The most dramatic encounter yet was about to happen. It was Tuesday evening in the town of Haddon Heights. A trolley car, filled with passengers, was rattling down the tracks on its way to Clementon. Suddenly, the motorman, a man named Howard Campbell, saw something perched on the electrical wires above the track. It was the creature. The passengers all rushed to the windows, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. It was exactly as the papers had described. A horse-like head, glowing eyes, and huge bat-like wings. As the trolley drew closer, the creature unfurled its wings and let out a shriek that was heard over the clatter of the car. Then it attacked. It swooped down from the wires, slamming into the front of the trolley with incredible force. Passengers screamed as the creature clawed and beat its wings against the roof of the car. The motorman and conductor were paralyzed with fear. For what felt like an eternity, the monster raged against the metal trolley before finally launching itself back into the sky and disappearing into the darkness. The news of the attack on the trolley spread like wildfire. This was a new level of terror. The Jersey Devil, or whatever it was, wasn't just some strange animal skulking in the shadows. It was actively, violently engaging with people. It was attacking their pets. It was attacking public transportation. It was laying siege to their towns. By Wednesday, January 20th, the entire region was in the grip of mass hysteria. Fear was a tangible thing, hanging in the winter air. People nailed their windows shut. They barred their doors. They brought their livestock into their homes. In towns across South Jersey and Pennsylvania, schools closed. Mills and factories shut down because workers were too terrified to walk to their jobs in the pre-dawn darkness. The streets, normally bustling with commerce and life, were eerily quiet. For the first time in modern American history, a monster had brought an entire industrialized region to a grinding halt. The devil was no longer just a story told around a campfire in the Pine Barrens. It was real, it was here, and no one knew where it would strike next. And then silence. The wave of terror that had washed over the Delaware Valley receded as quickly as it had arrived. After that one cataclysmic week, the sightings dropped off. The tracks vanished. The unearthly screams faded back into the wind whistling through the pines. The region took a collective breath. People went back to work. Schools reopened. The world, it seemed, returned to normal. But it was a new normal. The Jersey Devil was no longer a whispered secret of the Pineys. It was now a household name, a front-page celebrity. The legend had escaped the dark woods and was now loose in the American imagination. The national press, having fanned the flames of hysteria, now treated the whole affair with a kind of amused curiosity. Vaudeville acts and circus promoters saw an opportunity. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the devil, and if the real devil wouldn't show itself, well, someone would just have to make one. This is where the story takes a turn, from genuine unexplained terror to the bizarre world of American showmanship and outright fraud. In the immediate aftermath of the panic, a man named Norman Jeffries, a press agent for Philadelphia's Arch Street Museum, saw dollar signs. He teamed up with his boss, Jacob Hope, and they cooked up a plan. It was simple, audacious, and utterly ridiculous. They announced to the world that they had done what no one else could. They had captured the Jersey Devil. The public, still buzzing from the week of fear, was electrified. Crowds flocked to the museum, paying their 25 cents to see the beast that had terrorized a million people. And what did they see? Behind the bars of a cage stood a creature that was odd. It had a long, powerful tail, stood on two muscular hind legs, and had a pouch on its belly. It was unmistakably a kangaroo, but Jeffries and Hope had made some modifications. They had painted green stripes on its fur and, most importantly, had attached a pair of flimsy, bat-like wings to its shoulders with straps and wire. To complete the illusion, they hired a young boy to poke the animal with a stick through the bars, making it hop around and appear agitated, as if it were some untamable fiend. For a short time it worked. People wanted to believe. They wanted a resolution, a monster they could see and point at. But the hoax was clumsy, and the public wasn't that gullible for long. People who had actually seen kangaroos before pointed out the obvious. Others noticed the crude wiring holding the wings in place. The jig was up. Jeffries and Hope were exposed as frauds. Their Jersey Devil, nothing more than a costumed marsupial. The incident became a laughingstock, a cautionary tale about public hysteria and opportunistic hucksters. But the kangaroo hoax did something profound to the legend. It introduced the first major crack in its terrifying facade. It planted a seed of doubt. This was a lie, what else was? This opened the floodgates for the skeptics. Scientists who had remained largely silent during the peak of the panic now stepped forward with rational explanations. They looked at the collection of sightings from that week and began to pick them apart, not as a single monster's rampage, but as a series of unrelated, misidentified events, stitched together by fear and sensational journalism. The terrifying creature seen by Mr. and Mrs. Evans in Haddon Heights? The one with the head of a ram? Could it have been a barn owl, its heart-shaped, white face appearing alien and monstrous in the dark? Owls fly silently, and their screech can be blood-curdling. The tracks found in the snow across dozens of towns? The ones that seem to defy logic, crossing rooftops and clearing fences? Ornithologists suggested they could have been made by common birds, like crows or jays, hopping in the snow. The melting and refreezing of the snow could have distorted the prints, making them look larger and more bizarre than they actually were. And what about the most famous sighting of all? The one by trolley car passengers in Haddon Heights, the creature with wings and a horse-like head? The most compelling scientific theory points to a sandhill crane. These are enormous birds, standing up to 4 feet tall with a wingspan of over 6 feet. They're not native to New Jersey, but they do occasionally get blown off course during migration. Imagine seeing one of these prehistoric-looking birds, disoriented and panicked, landing on a snowy street at night, illuminated by a trolley's headlight. Its long neck, its powerful legs, its strange trumpeting call. It would be an utterly terrifying and alien sight to anyone unfamiliar with it. To a population already primed to see a monster, a sandhill crane could easily become the Jersey Devil. Each individual sighting could, with a bit of rational stretching, be explained away. A prankster with a firework, a flock of geese in the fog, a runaway farm animal, a shadow that played tricks on the eyes. The problem for the skeptics, however, was the sheer volume and consistency of the reports. Could thousands of people across 2 states all be mistaken in the same week, describing creatures with remarkably similar features? Seemed unlikely. The skeptics argued this was a classic case of mass hysteria. The story started with a few genuine, if misidentified, sightings. The newspapers then amplified these stories, creating a feedback loop of fear. Once the idea of the Jersey Devil was in everyone's mind, they started seeing it everywhere. Every strange sound in the night, every odd shape in the woods, was immediately interpreted as the monster. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a psychological phenomenon, a social contagion of fear. With the rise of these scientific explanations and the embarrassment of the kangaroo hoax, the Jersey Devil began a slow retreat. It faded from the front pages of national newspapers and went back home, to the Pine Barrens. The sightings didn't stop entirely, but they became less frequent, more isolated. The devil was no longer an imminent threat. It was becoming, once again, a part of the local folklore. It transformed from a terrifying predator into something else, a cultural icon, a mischievous mascot. The beast that had once shut down factories and closed schools was now being used to sell real estate and name sports teams. The NHL team, the New Jersey Devils, is the most famous example, but the creature's image started popping up all over South Jersey, on t-shirts, coffee mugs, and hot sauce labels. The terror of 1909 had been commodified, sanitized, and turned into a quirky piece of local pride. The devil became the unofficial greeter for the Pine Barrens, a spooky story to tell tourists, a boogeyman to scare children into behaving. But for those who lived deep in the pines, for those who knew the old stories passed down through generations, the devil was never just a joke or a logo. They knew that the silence wouldn't last forever. They knew that the creature that had terrorized their ancestors was just resting, waiting in the shadows of the twisted cedar swamps. And they were right. The devil had one more major, terrifying appearance to make, one that would bring it roaring into the modern age and challenge everything the skeptics thought they knew. The year was 1909. The world was hurtling forward on a wave of steel and steam. The first Ford Model T had just rolled off the assembly line. The Wright brothers had conquered the sky. In cities like Philadelphia and Camden, electric lights were pushing back the ancient darkness, and people were beginning to believe that science and reason had finally triumphed over the superstitions of the past. They were wrong. In the heart of the Delaware Valley, an old darkness was about to reawaken. It began on a frigid Sunday, January 16th. In Bristol, Pennsylvania, just across the river from the Pine Barrens, Postmaster E.W. Minster was startled from his sleep by a sound he described as an eerie, blood-curdling cry. It sounded, he said, like the combination of a screech owl and a locomotive whistle. He peered out his window into the pre-dawn gloom and saw something with large wings, hopping along the banks of the Delaware River. The next morning, he and others found strange tracks in the snow. They weren't from a bird or a dog or any known animal. They were cloven like a goat's, but split in a way no one had ever seen. The tracks led down to the river and simply stopped. The same night, Bristol police officer James Sackville had his own encounter. While on patrol, he heard a terrifying scream from the darkness. He turned to see a winged creature with a head like a ram and glowing red eyes. He fired his revolver at it, but the thing simply screeched again and flew off into the night. When dawn broke, the town was buzzing. The tracks were everywhere. They were on the ground, but they were also on rooftops 3 stories high. They crossed wide yards in a single bound. They appeared in the middle of snow-covered fields with no tracks leading in or out. It was impossible. It was inexplicable. And it was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the phenomenon exploded. The story of the Bristol sightings hit the newspapers, and suddenly, reports flooded in from dozens of towns across the Delaware Valley. The creature, it seemed, was on the move. And its calling card was always the same. Those bizarre, cloven hoof prints. They were found in Burlington, where they crossed over fences and disappeared. They were found in Gloucester City, dotting the rooftops of homes. They were discovered in Moorestown, where a posse of farmers tracked them for 20 miles before the prints led to a field and vanished into thin air. Panic began to set in. This wasn't some backwoods legend whispered by Pineys anymore. This was happening in populated towns, in people's backyards. The creature itself was being seen more and more. In Gloucester, it was spotted flying over the rooftops. In Riverside, a man named George Snyder watched in disbelief as the creature stood in his backyard, eating his dog. He described it as having the head of a horse, the wings of a bat, and a long serpentine neck. By Wednesday, January 20th, the region was in the grip of full-blown hysteria. The Philadelphia Inquirer, the Camden Courier-Post, every major newspaper was running front-page headlines about the flying hoof and the winged terror. The story had gone from a local curiosity to a regional crisis. Fear was a contagion, and it spread faster than any fire. People started bolting their doors and shuttering their windows. Parents refused to let their children go to school, forcing many districts to close entirely. Mills and factories shut down as workers were too terrified to walk to their jobs in the dark. The economy of an entire region ground to a halt, paralyzed by fear of a monster. The creature grew bolder. It was no longer content to just leave tracks and screech in the darkness. It started interacting with people, and those interactions were terrifying. In Camden, a woman named Mary Sorbinski heard a commotion in her yard. She ran outside to find the Jersey Devil attacking her dog. She grabbed a broom and beat the creature until it let go, screeching and flying away, leaving her brave dog whimpering on the ground. She gave one of the most famous descriptions of the beast: a creature with the head of a collie, the face of a horse, and the body of a kangaroo with huge leathery wings. That same night, a social club in Gloucester City was attacked. Members were sitting inside when they heard a horrific shriek. They looked out the window to see the devil on the roof of a nearby shed, its glowing red eyes fixed on them. They watched, frozen in terror, as it leaped from the roof and flew away. In West Collingswood, a trolley car full of passengers was buzzed by the creature. The conductor, a man named Howard Campbell, described it as having wings and a head like a horse. The passengers screamed in terror as the thing circled their trolley before disappearing into the night. The police were inundated. They received hundreds of calls, but they were powerless. How do you fight a shadow? How do you arrest a nightmare? Posses were formed. Groups of brave or perhaps foolish men armed with shotguns and rifles ventured out into the night, determined to bring the monster down. They followed the tracks, they responded to sightings, but they always arrived too late. The creature was always one step ahead, a phantom that melted back into the shadows. The panic reached such a fever pitch that the Philadelphia Zoo offered a $10,000 reward for the creature's capture, dead or alive. This, of course, brought out every huckster and prankster in the state. One man in Philadelphia claimed to have the devil, but it turned out to be a kangaroo he had painted with green stripes and fitted with fake wings. He was nearly torn apart by the angry, terrified mob that had gathered to see it. The climax of the Week of Terror came on Friday, January 22nd. The sightings were more frequent, more aggressive than ever. In Clementon, another trolley car was attacked, but this time the creature landed on the roof, clawing and screeching, sending the passengers into a panic. The power lines for the trolley sparked and hissed, and the creature flew off, screaming into the darkness. Later that night, in the city of Camden, a firehouse crew turned their hose on the creature after it landed on the firehouse roof. It shrieked in anger and flew away. It seemed the entire Delaware Valley was under siege by a single malevolent entity. And then silence. As suddenly as it had begun, it was over. After Friday night, the sightings stopped. The tracks disappeared. The terrifying screams no longer echoed through the cold January air. Saturday came and went with no new reports. Then Sunday. The monster was gone. The Week of Terror had ended. People slowly, cautiously began to emerge from their homes. Schools and factories reopened. Life began to return to normal. But it was a new kind of normal. A normal where everyone had to accept that for 7 days, their modern rational world had been turned upside down. For 1 week, a monster from the darkest corners of American folklore had stepped out of the myth and into reality, terrorizing hundreds of thousands of people across 2 states. They were left with 1,000 questions. Was it mass hysteria, fueled by sensational newspaper reporting? Was it a series of elaborate pranks? Or did something truly ancient and unexplainable pay them a visit? The physical evidence, the countless tracks seen by thousands of credible witnesses, from police officers to postmasters, suggested something tangible was out there. But its ability to appear and disappear, to be everywhere at once, defied all logic. The Great Panic of 1909 was over, but the legend of the Jersey Devil was now cemented in the American consciousness, more powerful and more terrifying than ever before. The creature had proven it was not just a story to scare children. It was real. And the most chilling question of all was not what they had seen, but why it had returned, and when it might decide to come back again. The Week of Terror in 1909 left an indelible scar on the psyche of New Jersey. In the immediate aftermath, a fragile quiet settled over the state, but it wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the hushed, nervous silence of a community holding its breath. People avoided the woods. Children were kept indoors after dusk. The Pine Barrens, once a place of rustic beauty, were now viewed with suspicion and dread, a vast, unknowable wilderness that had birthed a nightmare. For a time it seemed every shadow held a winged horror. Every strange cry in the night was the shriek of the devil. But mass panic, by its very nature, cannot be sustained. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the raw fear began to fade, replaced by a kind of folkloric acceptance. The Jersey Devil receded from the headlines and returned to the campfire story, a boogeyman to frighten children, a local quirk to tell outsiders. The world, after all, was moving on. The Roaring Twenties brought jazz and industry. The Great Depression brought breadlines and desperation. Then came the drums of war in Europe and the Pacific. The people of New Jersey, and indeed the world, had very real, very human monsters to contend with. The memory of a winged creature in the pines seemed almost quaint by comparison. Sightings didn't stop entirely, of course. They never do. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, isolated reports would trickle in from the deep woods. A farmer in Chatsworth would find his chicken coop torn to shreds by something not quite a fox or a bear. A group of hunters near Batstow would speak of a blood-curdling scream that sent them packing, leaving their gear behind. In 1937, a truck driver on the lonely Route 206 swore his vehicle was buzzed by a huge, leathery-winged animal that swooped out of the pitch-black pines. But these were sporadic incidents, dismissed by most as misidentification, local superstitions, or outright hoaxes. The creature was dormant, a sleeping giant in the collective consciousness. Then, after the Second World War, something shifted. America was changing. A victorious nation boomed with newfound prosperity. Soldiers returned home, families grew, and cities began to spill outwards. Suburbia was born. New housing developments with neat lawns and freshly paved roads began to push relentlessly into the wilderness, gnawing at the edges of the pine barrens. Humanity was encroaching on the devil's territory once more, and it seemed the devil was about to push back. The first major sign that the creature was reawakening came in 1951, in the small town of Gibbstown. A group of young boys were playing in a wooded area near their homes when they heard a sound they would never forget. It was a high-pitched, terrifying scream that echoed through the trees. They froze, their blood running cold. And then they saw it. Emerging from the thicket was a figure that defied all logic. It was tall and pale, with a long neck and a horrifying, horse-like face. The boys didn't wait for a second look. They screamed and ran for their lives, bursting out of the woods and telling the first adults they could find. Their story was so filled with genuine terror that it was taken seriously. A crowd of concerned parents and residents gathered. One woman, whose son was among the witnesses, claimed she heard the screams and looked out her window to see a monstrous figure. The police were called, but a search of the woods turned up nothing. For a week, the town was on edge. The boys refused to go back near those woods. They knew what they had seen. The story made local papers, and for the first time in a generation, the name Jersey Devil was spoken not as a joke, but as a genuine, frightening possibility. This was just the beginning. As the 1950s rolled on, the encounters became more frequent and more brazen. In 1957, the Department of Conservation received a report from officials in the Glassboro Fish and Game Preserve. They had discovered the mangled remains of a dog. But what was truly disturbing was that the dog's body had been found inexplicably lodged high in the branches of a tree, far beyond the reach of any known predator. But the incident that truly brought the Jersey Devil roaring back into the public consciousness occurred in the winter of 1960, in Mays Landing. It began with strange reports filtering into the local police department. Residents near the Great Egg Harbor River were hearing unearthly screams at night. Then, two police officers, patrolling a desolate road near the local power plant, saw something they couldn't explain. A shadowy, winged form darted across the road in front of their patrol car and vanished into the darkness. They were shaken, but couldn't make a positive identification. A few days later, the owner of a local club, Harry Hunt, was closing up for the night when he heard a scratching sound at his back door. He dismissed it as an animal, but the sound was followed by a screech so loud and piercing it rattled the windows. Hunt grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door. In the beam of light, he saw it. A creature about 4 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, covered in dark fur or hair, with a long tail and glowing red eyes. It let out another shriek and disappeared into the night. The next morning, the local fire chief, John Webster, was called to a farm on the outskirts of town. A farmer reported that 23 of his chickens had been slaughtered during the night. The coop was destroyed, the door ripped from its hinges. But the chickens hadn't been eaten. They had just been viciously killed and left. Webster, a no-nonsense man, was baffled. As he investigated, he found a set of bizarre, cloven hoof tracks leading away from the coop and towards the woods. The combination of the police sighting, Hunt's terrifying encounter, and the slaughtered chickens sent a wave of panic through Mays Landing. Parents refused to send their children to school. The story hit the newspapers, including the Philadelphia Bulletin. The headline read, "Flying Monster Terrorizes Jersey Area." The situation became so serious that local officials, including Fire Chief Webster, publicly considered a plan to hunt the creature down. They even debated closing the local schools until the threat was dealt with. For the first time since 1909, the Jersey Devil was being treated not as folklore, but as a clear and present danger to a community. This new wave of sightings was different from the panic of 1909. The world was more modern, more scientific. This was the era of the Cold War, the space race, and a burgeoning interest in the unknown. The term cryptozoology was entering the lexicon. People like Ivan T. Sanderson were investigating Bigfoot and other mystery animals. The Jersey Devil was no longer just a local demon. It was now a cryptid, a specimen of an unknown species, a puzzle to be solved. Investigators and monster hunters, both amateur and professional, began to descend on the Pine Barrens, armed with cameras, tape recorders, and plaster for casting tracks. They were looking for evidence, for proof. The legend was evolving. It was shedding its supernatural skin and taking on a new, more tangible form. It was no longer just the 13th child of Mother Leeds, a curse born of witchcraft. Now it was a biological anomaly, a surviving prehistoric creature, perhaps even an extraterrestrial. Theories abounded, but one thing was certain: the creature was back. It had adapted to the changing world, moving from the deepest parts of the forest to the very edge of civilization. It was watching, and it was making its presence known. The line between wilderness and suburbia had become a hunting ground, and the people of New Jersey were beginning to understand that the monster in their backyard was not going away. It was simply waiting for its next chance to emerge from the shadows. As the second half of the 20th century dawned, the world was changing at a breathtaking pace. The atom was split, humanity was reaching for the stars, and the glow of television screens began to flicker in living rooms across the nation. In this new age of scientific certainty and technological marvel, a creature of folklore should have withered and died, relegated to dusty books and the ramblings of old-timers. But the Jersey Devil did not die. It adapted. It learned the new boundaries, the new roads, the new fears of a modernizing society. In 1951, in the small town of Gibbstown, a group of young boys claimed they were chased from a local creek by a horrifying creature. Their story was classic, a screaming, flying thing that sent them running for their lives. But this wasn't a colonial village. It was a modern American town. The police were called, an investigation was launched, and the papers reported on it. The incident served as a stark reminder that the devil wasn't just a story told around a campfire. It was a living, breathing source of terror that could erupt into the bright, optimistic world of post-war America without warning. Then came 1960. In Mays Landing, right on the edge of the Wharton State Forest, local business owners reported hearing unearthly shrieks in the night. The sounds were so disturbing, so alien, that they called the fire department, fearing someone was being attacked. When firefighters arrived, they found nothing but a series of bizarre, cloven tracks in the snow near a building. The tracks led to a fence, and then they simply stopped, as if the creature that made them had taken flight. The incident was so credible, so baffling, that officials from the state's Fish and Game Department were called in. They took plaster casts of the prints, but could offer no definitive explanation. A bear? A deer? No known animal matched the tracks or the terrifying sounds described by the witnesses. The Mays Landing incident was different. It wasn't just a fleeting glimpse in the dark. It was physical evidence, investigated by authorities, a tangible mystery that defied easy answers. This marked a crucial shift in the legend. The Jersey Devil was no longer just a monster. It was becoming a case file. As the years rolled on, the phenomenon of cryptozoology, the search for hidden or unknown animals, began to gain traction. People weren't just running from the devil anymore. They were starting to hunt for it. Armed with cameras, tape recorders, and a thirst for the unknown, amateur investigators and seasoned monster hunters began to venture into the Pine Barrens. They were looking for the creature that science said couldn't exist, a living relic in a world that had seemingly explained away all its monsters. These new hunters found a forest that was as enigmatic as the creature it supposedly hid. The Pine Barrens themselves seemed to conspire to protect their secrets. Compasses would spin wildly due to natural iron deposits in the soil. GPS signals would drop without explanation. The dense canopy of pine and cedar could swallow sound, creating an eerie, muffling silence one moment, and playing tricks with acoustics the next. A snapping twig could sound like it was right behind you when it was 100 yards away. It was the perfect environment for a legend to thrive, a place where the rational mind could be easily tricked, and where the fear of the unknown felt palpably real. Throughout the 70s and 80s, the encounters continued, evolving with the times. They were no longer tales of stolen livestock, but of terrifying roadside encounters on the lonely stretches of the Garden State Parkway or the Atlantic City Expressway. Drivers reported a massive, dark shape swooping down in front of their headlights, its leathery wings beating against the windshield. A creature that could pace a car going 50 miles an hour before veering off into the impenetrable darkness of the pines. These weren't farmers or villagers from a bygone era. These were commuters, vacationers, truck drivers, ordinary people caught in an extraordinary moment, their modern machines powerless against a primal terror. One of the most chilling accounts from this period came from a park ranger who was making his rounds late one night. He stopped his truck to investigate a strange noise, and as he stepped out, he heard it, a sound he described as a mix between a woman's scream and the shriek of a hawk, but amplified to an impossible volume. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere at once. He drew his flashlight and swept the beam across the woods, his heart pounding in his chest. The beam landed on two glowing red eyes low to the ground about 50 yards away. But then impossibly the eyes rose. They didn't just stand up. They ascended straight into the air 10, 15, 20 feet off the ground, until they were looking down at him from above the tree line. He never saw a body, just the two malevolent red lights hanging in the darkness. He scrambled back into his truck and sped away, the unearthly scream chasing him down the dirt road. As the legend persisted, it began to seep into the very identity of New Jersey itself. It became a cultural touchstone, a piece of regional pride. The state's professional hockey team, founded in 1982, was named the New Jersey Devils. The creature appeared on t-shirts, in comic books, and as the subject of television documentaries. It was becoming a celebrity monster, a household name. But this fame was a double-edged sword. With every piece of merchandise and every pop culture reference, the line between genuine mystery and commercialized folklore became increasingly blurred. Was the Jersey Devil a real flesh-and-blood cryptid? Or was it just New Jersey's official boogeyman? A fun story to tell tourists and sell souvenirs? For the people who lived in the shadow of the Pine Barrens, it was no joke. The fear was real. In the late 1990s, a family living in a new housing development bordering the forest began to be terrorized by something in the woods. At night, they would hear scratching at the siding of their house, followed by that same infamous scream. Their dog would bark uncontrollably at the tree line, its hair standing on end, before whimpering and retreating to the safety of the porch. One evening, the father, fed up and armed with a shotgun, went to investigate. He saw a tall, hunched figure moving just beyond the reach of his floodlights. He raised his weapon and fired a warning shot into the air. The figure let out a piercing shriek that shattered the night's silence, and then, with a sound like massive leathery sheets being snapped in the wind, it was gone. They never saw the full creature, but they sold their house and moved within the year. This was the new reality of the Jersey Devil legend. It was a clash of two worlds, the relentless march of suburban sprawl pushing deeper and deeper into the ancient wilderness, and the wilderness pushing back with a ferocity that defied all modern understanding. The creature was no longer just a rural legend. It was a suburban nightmare. It was the terrifying possibility that no matter how high you build your fences, no matter how bright you make your streetlights, the darkness beyond holds something ancient, something wild, and something that does not recognize your property lines. As the 20th century came to a close, the world was on the cusp of a digital revolution. A new era of unprecedented documentation was about to begin, with cameras in every pocket and eyes in the sky. The old shadows that had hidden the devil for nearly 300 years were about to be flooded with digital light. And everyone wondered, when the darkness was finally pulled back, what would be left standing there? The first pixels flickered to life in homes across the Pine Barrens, and with them, the nature of the hunt changed forever. The Jersey Devil legend, once passed down through whispers and smudged newsprint, was uploaded. It became data. It found a new home in the burgeoning digital wilderness of the internet. Suddenly, the lone researcher poring over dusty books in a library was no longer alone. They were connected to thousands of others in chat rooms and on crudely designed websites, all sharing their stories, their theories, their grainy photographs. Websites like Weird NJ became digital campfires, where a new generation could gather and trade tales of the unexplainable, keeping the legend's heart beating with a steady electric pulse. This new connectivity was a double-edged sword. For every genuine account shared, a dozen hoaxes could be crafted and spread with terrifying speed. The digital age didn't just provide new tools for the hunter, it gave a megaphone to the trickster. The line between what was real and what was a clever fabrication blurred into a mess of corrupted JPGs and shaky, low-resolution videos. Anyone with a copy of Photoshop and a bit of creativity could manufacture a monster. The beast of the pines was now stalked by a new predator: digital manipulation. The question was no longer just, "Did you see it?" It was, "Can you prove this image hasn't been altered?" And then, in 2015, the digital world exploded. A man named Dave Black was driving home from his security guard job in Galloway Township, near Atlantic City, when he saw something impossible. He pulled over, grabbed his phone, and snapped a picture of a creature perched in the trees by a golf course. It was dark, almost a silhouette, with a goat-like head, leathery bat-like wings, and thin, gangly legs. He claimed it spread its wings and flew off into the darkness. He sent the photo to a local news outlet, and within hours, the Jersey Devil was trending worldwide. For the first time, a piece of evidence wasn't a century-old sketch or a third-hand account. It was a clear, modern digital photograph, shared and analyzed on a global scale. Believers hailed it as the definitive proof they had been waiting for. It was exactly as described in the old legends, a perfect match for the 1909 sightings. The head, the wings, the posture, it was all there. The photograph was a viral sensation. It was dissected on news programs, debated in online forums, and became the face of the legend for the 21st century. But just as quickly as the believers celebrated, the skeptics sharpened their knives. The digital light that illuminated the creature also put it under a microscope. Scrutiny came from every angle. Some pointed out the creature's stiff, unmoving posture, suggesting it was a lawn ornament or a Halloween decoration. Others, with a more creative eye, claimed it was a piñata strung up in the trees as a prank. The most detailed analysis suggested it might be a clever hoax using a drone frame, some taxidermy parts, and a bit of fabric. The creator of the image, Dave Black, stood by his story, but the damage was done. The Galloway photo, once hailed as the ultimate proof, became the ultimate Rorschach test. You saw what you wanted to see: a real-life monster, or a very clever fake. It perfectly encapsulated the modern state of the legend, a moment of profound mystery instantly undercut by the pervasive possibility of digital deceit. This new environment forced a shift in the skeptical argument. For centuries, the primary explanation for Jersey Devil sightings was misidentification. A great blue heron, with its impressive wingspan and guttural cry, seen in low light, could easily be mistaken for something monstrous. A sandhill crane, a rare but not impossible visitor to the region, has a similarly unsettling call and gangly appearance. Even a deer suffering from severe mange, losing its fur and appearing gaunt and alien, could fit the description. These explanations still hold water. But now, skeptics have to contend with technology. They have to explain away not just a fleeting glimpse in the woods, but a digital file that can be paused, zoomed in on, and analyzed frame by frame. The scientific community, when it bothers to weigh in at all, points to a powerful psychological phenomenon: pareidolia. This is the human brain's tendency to perceive a familiar pattern, like a face, in a random or ambiguous visual. It's why we see a man in the moon or animals in the clouds. In a dark, blurry photo from the Pine Barrens, our brains, primed by 300 years of folklore, are hardwired to see a demon, not a strangely shaped tree branch or a piece of trash caught in the wind. The legend itself creates the monster in our minds before our eyes even have a chance to process what they're actually seeing. Yet, as science and skepticism worked to dismantle the legend with logic and reason, popular culture was busy rebuilding it, bigger and stronger than ever. The Jersey Devil had graduated from a local cautionary tale to a global pop culture icon. It was the monster of the week in an iconic episode of The X-Files, where Mulder and Scully chased it through the woods, cementing its place in the pantheon of great American monsters. It was hunted by the Winchester brothers in Supernatural. It appeared in video games, comics, and countless paranormal reality shows, each appearance reinforcing the core elements of the myth for a new audience. Most famously, it became the namesake and logo for New Jersey's National Hockey League team. The terrifying demon of folklore was now a beloved sports mascot, its stylized, demonic face plastered on jerseys and cheered on by thousands. The creature that once sent entire towns into a state of panic was now used to sell tickets and merchandise. This was the ultimate strange victory for the legend. It had become so ingrained in the state's identity that New Jersey embraced it, domesticating the demon and turning its terrifying scream into a rallying cry. It was no longer just the monster of the Pine Barrens. It was the monster for New Jersey. And still the hunt goes on. But the tools have changed. The posses of 1909 with their shotguns and pitchforks have been replaced by modern-day cryptozoologists armed with far more sophisticated gear. They venture into the pines not with torches, but with thermal imaging cameras designed to detect heat signatures in the dead of night. They set up parabolic microphones to capture sounds beyond the range of human hearing, listening for that infamous shriek. Drones with high-resolution cameras now fly over the dense canopy, providing a view of the swamps and forests that was once impossible, searching for any sign of movement below. Every year, new expeditions are mounted. Every year, new footage emerges, a strange heat signature on a thermal camera, an unidentifiable howl on an audio recording, a blurry shape darting between the trees on a trail cam. Each new piece of data is uploaded, analyzed, and debated endlessly. We have more information, more evidence than ever before in the legend's long history. We have flooded the Pine Barrens with the torrent of digital light, peering into its darkest corners with technology the original colonists couldn't have even dreamed of. But this flood of information hasn't brought clarity. It's brought more confusion, more questions, more debate. The digital age promised answers, but it has only deepened the mystery. For every piece of potential evidence, there are 100 new reasons to doubt it. We are drowning in data, but we are starving for truth. And it forces us to confront a terrifying possibility, that after all this time, after all the technology and all the searching, we might be no closer to finding the Jersey Devil than Mother Leeds was on that stormy night in 1735. The real question now is not what lurks in the shadows of the pines, but why, after 3 centuries of failed attempts, we are still so desperate to find it. That desperation is the real heart of this story. It's the engine that has kept this legend alive, breathing fire into it for 3 centuries while countless other folktales have withered and died. The enduring power of the Jersey Devil has very little to do with a cursed 13th child, and everything to do with us. It's a mirror, reflecting the changing fears and anxieties of a nation growing up around a patch of dark, untamable woods. Think about the very soul of the Pine Barrens. It is a stubborn wilderness, an island of acidic soil and twisted pitch pines surrounded by the relentless urban sprawl of the eastern seaboard. It's a place that defies easy cultivation, a landscape that has resisted being tamed. And in that resistance we need a symbol. We need an embodiment of that wild primordial spirit. The Jersey Devil is the perfect candidate. It is nature's last defiant scream against the encroaching streetlights and highways. It is the personification of the idea that no matter how much concrete we pour, no matter how many maps we draw, there will always be corners of the world, and of our minds, that remain stubbornly, beautifully, terrifyingly wild. The creature isn't just in the Pine Barrens. In a way, it is the Pine Barrens. But its role is deeper than just a symbol of nature. It's also a scapegoat, a vessel for our collective fears. In the 18th century, it was a manifestation of religious anxiety, a cautionary tale about straying from God, about witchcraft and damnation. The Leeds family, with their Quaker beliefs and political opposition, were easy targets. The monster born from their mother was a convenient way to demonize the other, the nonconformist. As the centuries rolled on, the devil's purpose shifted. When livestock vanished, it wasn't a fox or a wolf. It was the devil. When a strange sound echoed through the woods, it wasn't the wind in the pines. It was the devil. When a child went missing, it wasn't a tragic accident. It was the devil. It's a pattern as old as humanity. It is profoundly easier to unite against a single monstrous enemy than it is to confront the messy, complex realities of disease, poverty, political strife, or simple bad luck. The Jersey Devil provides a face for the faceless anxieties of life. It gives us a target for our fear, something we can hunt, something we can try to understand, even if we never succeed. In 1909, during that week of absolute terror, the world was on the brink of immense change. Industrialization was rampant, cities were exploding, and the old agrarian way of life was fading. That mass panic wasn't just about a monster. It was about a society grappling with a terrifying, uncertain future. The devil was simply the spark that lit the fuse of their collective stress. And today, in our hyper-connected scientific world, you'd think a creature like this would have no place. We have satellite imagery, DNA analysis, and motion-activated trail cams. We have explained away so many of the world's mysteries. And yet, the legend is arguably stronger than ever. Why? Because we are starved for mystery. We live in an age of information overload, where every question has an answer a thumb swipe away. That certainty, that lack of wonder can feel sterile, even suffocating. The Jersey Devil is an antidote to that. It's a glitch in the matrix of our predictable world. It's a story that allows us to believe, just for a moment, that the world is bigger, stranger, and more magical than we think. It's a modern American myth. We don't have ancient Greek gods or medieval dragons woven into our national identity. Our myths are younger, grittier, born in the backwoods and whispered around campfires. We have Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, the Mothman in West Virginia, and in the dark heart of New Jersey we have our very own homegrown demon. These aren't just stories, they are acts of cultural rebellion against a world that insists everything can be explained. To believe in the Jersey Devil even a little is to keep a door open to the impossible. It's to hold on to that childlike sense of wonder and fear that is so easily extinguished by adult life. And for the people who live in and around the Pines, it's something more. It's a part of their identity. The Jersey Devil is their local celebrity, their mascot, their shared secret. It's a source of tourism, a brand, a piece of folklore that makes their home unique. To them, the devil isn't just a monster. It's a neighbor, an unsettling, occasionally terrifying neighbor, but there's nonetheless. This is the ultimate paradox of the hunt. To actually find the Jersey Devil, to capture it, kill it, or definitively prove it a hoax would be the worst possible outcome for the legend. The moment you drag the monster into the light, it ceases to be a monster. It becomes just an animal, a specimen, a footnote in a biology textbook. All of its power, all of its symbolic weight, would evaporate under the sterile fluorescent lights of a laboratory. The mystery is the fuel. The search is the point. The story is the prize. The unanswered question is what gives it eternal life. So we continue to search. We tell the stories, we watch the documentaries, we venture into the pines at dusk, hoping for a glimpse of leathery wings against the moon. We do it not because we expect to find a creature of flesh and blood, but because we are searching for something else entirely. We're looking for a connection to a wilder past. We're looking for a thrill to shake us from our modern complacency. We're looking for proof that wonder still exists in the world. The Jersey Devil is not a biological entity to be discovered. It is a cultural entity that we have created and continue to sustain. It was born of slander and fear, nurtured by isolation and uncertainty, and has matured into a powerful symbol of the American wilderness and our own deep-seated need for mystery. It will never be caught, because it doesn't live in the swamps of southern New Jersey. It lives in our stories. It lives in our imaginations. It lives in that dark, unexplored forest within the human mind, the one place where monsters are, and always will be, undeniably real. The creature in the woods is just a shadow. The legend is the thing with teeth, and it has been feeding for 300 years.